Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is Season 2, Episode 3. The stories in this one are called The Storyteller and Nightsong. So spoilers for the episode as always, and this is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Cindy for making the pick. I almost failed to say that sentence. But yes, welcome, we're back with 80s Twilight Zone and a couple of very tonally similar stories in a weird way. One's very much about life, the other one's very much about death, but there's kind of a sentimentality to both, which we'll get into here. But the first story in this one is called The Storyteller, and it starts off in present day, and this old woman's with her young niece, and she's leaving the library, and she thinks she sees a man that she recognizes, so she hails a cab and gets in the cab, and her niece is like, who do you think this man is? Who are we following? Like, this is kind of crazy. Like, not super crazy, but like, and kind of like, hey, you're being really spontaneous right now. This feels kind of wild. So that's actually just the framing device, because most of the story is a flashback. It's the old woman telling her niece who she thinks this man is. And it goes all the way back to the 1930s when she had just got out of like college and stuff like that, and she was starting her career as a teacher, and she was filling in as a substitute for a few months because the teacher in this small town was leaving to go and help with her sister who was giving birth, I think was the reason. Doesn't really matter, but she's filling in this small town, and that's where we get. And I had to stop and think about the timeline here. Wait a minute, what age are you? If you were, like, you're saying you were in your 20s and the 30s. Is it reasonable that you're still alive? And then I thought about it and went, oh yeah, it just means you're in your 70s. And I'm like, oh, that's wild. Like, I don't know, it's just weird to think that people who were already adults before World War II started were still alive in the 80s, even though it makes sense because it was so long ago now. But still, time's a funny thing. And our perception of what time period and how close each one is always weird. But anyway, the story here is that there's a young boy in the classroom that she is teaching who is a little bit weird. He's a little bit quiet and he doesn't really interact or pay much attention to everything. But the other teacher that she's replacing did bring this boy up and said, hey, he's going to want to access the library books. You have to let him do that whenever he wants. It's kind of like a weird thing to say, like a weird like note about her students. But it's like, okay, no big deal. Let him read the library books. Not a huge issue. But what the story turns out to be, the reason why he's so distracted and doesn't seem to engage with the others, doesn't seem to engage in the lessons, is because he's constantly writing stories. And the reason why he's constantly writing stories, as the teacher finds out when she happens to walk past where he lives on her way home that night, is that he tells stories to what seems to be his grandfather, but turns out to actually be his great-great-great-great-grandfather, who's 140 something years old. And the teacher's like, wait, that doesn't, because the kid won't tell her any of this at first. It's not until she shows up like another night, because she's been starting to kind of like ask, hey, can I speak to your guardian? I want to talk to you about your schoolwork and so on and so on. It's not until later in the story where the kid finally opens up and says that his great-great-great-great-grandfather is 140 something years old. And he's been kept alive, because her reaction, of course, is no one lives that long, right? Outside of the Bible, perhaps, no one's ever reportedly lived longer than like 110. And he says that he stays alive because of stories, because he always starts telling him a story one night, but doesn't finish it, so that he has to wake up the next day to get the end of the story. So he finishes the story the next day and then starts a new one. So he's constantly writing stories to keep his great-great-great-great-grandfather alive. And obviously she's skeptical about this. She doesn't really believe it, even though it's kind of a sweet sentiment. And then the big kind of thing that challenges the characters in the story is that he gets injured. He falls out of a tree and breaks his arm. And the doctor says he has to stay at the doctor's place overnight. And he looks very worried because he has to get home to his great-great-great-grandfather, and it's actually the teacher who goes and visits the grandfather to tell him, hey, your grandson's not going to be back tonight. And the grandson looks worried, but the end of the story is that when the kid does arrive home the next day, she stayed there and finished the story from his notebook and started a new one. And she even says that she doesn't necessarily believe or is convinced that this is keeping him alive, but there was no harm in doing it just in case. And it's a sweet little moment, and she hugs the boy, and You know, and we come back to the wraparound after that, but I'll get to that in a minute. Just to talk about the main story here. It's an interesting concept. You know, the idea of storytelling being so important to us that it can literally keep us alive, and I think there's some nice sentiment to that. The idea of how much we as human beings love art and want to kind of like care about it, right? This idea that someone is like so determined to see like the end of a trilogy, they might even fight to keep alive a few extra months just so they can see the ending before they finally go. Not everyone's going to have that type of moment, but it does kind of feel like a love letter to kind of that idea in a sense, is that, you know, like if the story's unfinished, then you'll never actually truly rest. And this is, in theory, kept this guy alive much longer than he should. I think what's interesting conceptually about this episode to me, the episode I don't think hits on or even really brings up, is actually kind of a more cynical side of this that I was thinking about as it was presenting these ideas. Isn't this a little bit cruel on the younger like generation? If you take this literal, right, this idea that to potentially everyone could live forever as long as the young people all tell their elders stories but don't finish, so they have to come back for the ending and keep going forever. This boy's life, as we see it, is completely taken over by this task. He's not doing well in school. He's not paying attention in school. He doesn't really have any friends. You know, he's not living his life because he's too busy keeping his great grandfather alive. And the episode never kind of views it from that lens of like, oh, you're living still at 140, but at the expense of this kid even having his own life. And it's like, if we could keep everyone alive forever, but the price of doing that would be that everyone younger wouldn't be able to have their own lives, then it's not really, I think, worth it. But the episode never really touches into that area. It's more the sentimental, nice side of this that it's kind of getting to. And maybe also in some ways the idea of like the spirit of your you know, ancestors living down through each person in a more literal sense, because you're keeping the idea of the family line alive by keeping, you know, like the idea that this one person represents everyone down the line kind of thing. But yeah, that was like where my mind started to go, was like how this is actually kind of cruel on the kid not being able to have his own life because he's busy keeping his grandfather alive. I mean, at the same time, like, he wouldn't have a guardian, so maybe he should be doing this to some extent until at least he's 18 or something. But at a certain point, it's like, I feel like you should let yourself die so the younger generation can actually live their life. You know, I was actually a little conflicted about the sentimental side of this message. So I think this is an interesting story. I think it brings up some really cool ideas that got me thinking, but I don't think I was thinking about them in the same way that the episode was presenting them, or that the way the episode wanted me to feel about them. It was more making me think about it from a different angle. And so it's kind of a success in one way, but not in the way that it intended, bizarrely. But I suppose, you know, you take the win where you can get it in that case. The part of the episode that I like the least, though, the part of the story that I like the least, is probably the very end of the story, which is the framing device when it comes back. Because I was all into the idea of her finding this guy who's now in his 50s, or even 60s, because he's already like 10 in the backstory. So let's say he's about, 60-something. It's like, hey, maybe she finds they reconnect, and obviously I was like, oh, are they going to reveal that the great-great-great-grandfather is still alive somehow, that he's almost 200 years old and whatever. Instead, they pull this extra little twist that I don't think it needed, and it felt a bit hokey and just kind of like, oh, so we can have an extra Twilight Zone twist at the end of the story. It did not need to be there, but the final little twist is that when they go into the building, the apartment building, where they follow this man who's supposedly this young boy from the backstory, and they go up to his like apartment and they go to open the door, and it's like, oh, is the great-great-great-grandfather going to be alive? We start getting narration from the main character, and it flashes white, and we find out that she's telling this as a story to her mother, who is, you know, very, very old, much older. She's in her 70s, so her mother must be, you know, whatever, 100 or something. And the idea is that she's telling this story about this kid in the backstory to keep her mother alive, and she's not given the ending. She's like, nope, I'm not telling you if the old man's still alive, not until tomorrow. And it has the little sentimental thing, the little theme that plays, and it's I think this was an example. I've definitely noticed Twilight Zone do this sometimes, where it feels it needs to have one extra twist that I don't think actually adds anything and just feels a little bit trite. And this to me felt trite, this little extra tacked on twist of, oh, but this was a story all along. But okay, but so I don't know. So you're telling me that if any of this was true, she's also like finally telling her mother how she's keeping her alive by telling her this story. I don't know. Like, I think it just muddies the waters for over any of the messaging that was already there for me. Just for the sake of having a little cheap, like, layer to this, the cake, right? Oh, reveal, we're actually another layer up above that. I don't think it needed it. I feel a bit gimmicky, the ending. But the rest of the story, I do think presented some interesting ideas, in particular about how we, like, there's two sides of it. One is how we care about writing and art, and the idea of us caring about, finishing unfinished business, and the dedication even to keeping people alive is kind of sweet in of itself. But then there was the other side of it where I was a little bit more cynical and thought, oh, it's a bit of a burden for this kid keeping his great-great-grandfather alive, to the point where he doesn't really get to have his own life. Like, honestly, if I was writing this story, I think I would be ending this with the old man sort of saying, hey, you need to let me go, you have to live, like, I'm too much of a burden. Like, it's almost like he represents all the burdens of the previous generations of his family, as opposed to this, like, nice idea of keeping him alive. Or I'm like, yeah, you're keeping him alive in a bed where he can barely do anything, and he's just going to keep existing like that for what, another 80 years? Like, how much is that really achieving, or how much is he getting out of that kind of thing? Maybe I'm not supposed to be thinking about it that deep, but like, it's Twilight Zone. I'm going to look for the extra layers. I'm going to think about it a bit more when it presents me a story that has those extra elements. So it's a really interesting one, because I thought about it very heavily in a way that I don't think the episode was actually trying to make me go, but it's where my mind went with it. So maybe I'm just too cynical and jaded to look at it this way, but not a bad story though either. Certainly interesting, and like it's got some nice ideas for sure. So that is the Storyteller. The second story of the episode is called Nightsong. And this is one that I was very disappointed in by the time it ended, because it started off with so much potential, where I like the atmosphere of the setting, which is the main character of this one, who's an actress I recognized, actually. She's in Beverly Hills Cop, and she was also in the movie Leviathan, which is like a creature feature from the late 80s. But Beverly Hills Cop's where most people will probably recognize her. She's like the art gallery like friend that Axel Foley has in that movie. But she is the main character here, and she is a radio host. She's a disc jockey. And she does the midnight shift, and it's like a rainy night, and like the previous guy saying goodbye to the audience, she comes in, and there's a bit of atmosphere because it's late night. The setting's kind of cool, and the whole story that we're going to see unfold is this idea that she plays this album that was an ex-boyfriend album, like not he literally, he's the singer, he's the artist on the album, and it's a relationship that was years ago, and it's going to like bring memories back and all the rest of it. And it sets up that she is kind of in a bit of a rut. She's not really wanting to date. She's been kind of keeping to herself. And the other radio host like tries to ask her out, and she kind of turns him down, and he's maybe a little bit pushy, but ultimately he's kind of getting to this idea of like, hey, you can't just be on your own forever. Like, so if it's not going to be me, then you should probably, you seem kind of unhappy. He does tell her that she's forgotten how to smile at one point, which in hindsight, like today, that sounds a bit cringy to hear, because the idea of telling a woman to smile has become this thing with stigma to it. But I don't think it's coming from a bad place in the moment. He's just kind of making the point in the episode that she seems unhappy, and that, she's not seemed happy for a while. So it feels like it's coming from a fairly concerning place, but he tries to, like, get her to open up, and she's not having it, and she goes to just do her shift, but he's left out this album from her ex-boyfriend because he thought she might get a kick out of it. Instead, she feels a little bit weird about it. She feels kind of like, not offended, but insult, a little Like, this is not something she's happy to see. It's bringing up memories. But she decides to play it, right? At the start of her radio show, she plays this song from the album that her boyfriend made, her ex-boyfriend. And as it's playing, you see like a shadow form outside the window of the booth. And then all of a sudden, the boyfriend's there. He's this Englishman. But he disappears at the end of the song. And I was like, okay, I'm kind of into, one, the kind of setting and the mood that this story's bringing me. But I also kind of like the idea of, again, this is where I was talking about how there's some similar ideas between the two stories. This idea that the first story was storytelling. It was written word or spoken word and telling a narrative. Here it's music. It's the idea that music is literally bringing something back from her past and letting her see it like it's there. And then it disappears and she feels that she's just had like a weird hallucination or something. But it's literally bringing something back. In some way, it's keeping something alive, you might say, much, and not the exact same way as the first story, but you know, some overlap for sure thematically. And then, you know, it happens again where she plays the music again, and she sees him like in her house at one point. She sees him at a diner where she actually talks to him a little bit, and they talk about the past and reminisce. She seems to even get kind of into that conversation and kind of happy. But the meetings always take a bit of a dour turn where she gets kind of reminded of the pain and that he, you know, cheated on her, that he kind of left her behind, or she wanted to end the relationship, and it's been kind of this cold thing for the 5 or 6 years or whatever it's been since this all broke down. So I do think the scenes once they get talking are a little bit on the cheesier side, so I wasn't necessarily in love with that part of it. But the big thing for me with this story is just how by the numbers it actually felt once it got going, because you can kind of see exactly where it's going. It's like one of the most predictable Twilight Zone stories I think we've done in quite some time. And that is simply that this ex-boyfriend is dead. He's already dead, and he's been dead, and you know, it reveals that at the end when he takes her to this location and shows her where he crashed his motorbike. And the idea that he's living through the music, and it's like no one remembered him because he was this guy who had one album and didn't do that well, so no one cared about him or remembered him. But when she listened to it for the first time, because she'd avoided doing so up until then, it kind of like made him alive again a little bit, and he got a chance to come and say goodbye and feel important. And the episode ends with her, you know, there's a request from a caller to play the song that he did again. And she says she'd be happy to play it. And it's like she's accepted her past and she's comfortable with her past. It doesn't end with her going on a date with the other guy. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. But it's about her being able to like think about the past and accept what her past was, and sort of, you know, be at peace with it and move on with it, and kind of remember him fondly for the good memories that they had and things like that. And the funny thing is about this is that it made me think of an episode of the last season we got of Black Mirror, the Paul Giamatti episode, which was all about remembering someone, like an ex that he had that has passed away, and it's all about him trying to remember how she looked from photographs and stuff like that. And the central arc of the character is kind of similar to this character here, where it's all about him coming to, you know, he's kind of like tried to reject all those memories before because they're painful to think about, but now he's willing to remember them fondly and sort of see what they gave him in his life. And it kind of feels like this is a similar character arc for this character. The problem is that the reveal that the guy is dead is, one, very predictable, and just kind of feels like we're getting into kind of more cheesy territory. When I think the idea that she is able to have conversations with this ex-boyfriend whenever his music's playing, and then he disappears when it's off, I think that's as a core idea is actually really good. And there's a lot of atmosphere that comes with that, because it's usually nighttime and there's usually some kind of private atmosphere. But it never really does anything more than that. Like, I expected there to be some consequences for the fact that she was like standing talking to herself when she's supposed to be on the microphone talking to the audience on the radio show. But no one ever seems to, it never comes up. No one cares. It's not something the story's interested in doing. It's only interested in the next time she sees the boyfriend, which is fine. Like, it's focused and I can appreciate that. But it meant that there wasn't any other elements at play that I thought were going to maybe come into it. Like, maybe, you know, the other guy that works at the station would notice that she's acting kind of weird and get concerned or something. I don't know. But like, it felt like it was just kind of on a very singular path once it got going. So while I kind of liked a lot of the setup and the core idea of like the music kind of like making her go back and talk to this person from her past, the reveal that he was already dead and this was like a sort of spirit thing coming to see her, who's getting to sort of, you know, take care of some unfinished business with this relationship that ended sour, and he wants to patch it up before he leaves for the great beyond. That part like just felt a little bit more hokey and cheesy to me, and I think it was less interesting than all the potential that felt like it was there when it was starting up. Like I was really digging the opening to this story, and then it just kind of, it never really became what I wanted it to be, I suppose. And I don't even know if it's like an expectations thing, because it's not like I had expectations going in, but just I was hoping it had something, some kind of hook to offer me. And it just kind of did the most basic thing that I feel like we've seen before in Twilight Zone to some extent, and we've seen it in certainly other things since then. And that episode of Black Mirror that I mentioned was a very good episode of Black Mirror, and was the best episode of that season by a fair margin. So regardless, you know, it's like neither of these stories are bad, but neither are kind of knockouts either. They're kind of like, they both have interesting elements to them, and they both have good ideas, but neither, I would say, are a big, like, you know, like must-see episodes of Twilight Zone by any stretch. Also, I'm just noticing that the actor who played the boy in the first story, is that... Yeah, that's Bud from Married with Children. I even recognize him, jeez. Because he's younger here, you know, he's like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, something in that range. I'm not good with kids' ages, but yeah, like apparently that's Bud from Married with Children before he went on to do that show. That's interesting. But yeah, well, we had the lady from Beverly Hills Cop in the second story, and I don't really think I noticed or recognized anyone else throughout both stories. So yeah, not a bad time. I mean, season 2 definitely hasn't had a winner yet. And to be fair, I don't think season 1, like, you know, season 1 definitely had like 3 or 4 episodes in a row with no winners. Like they had those stretches, and then you'd get like a really good one. I'm just waiting for season 2 to give me one of those. I don't think season 2 has hit me with a story where I feel like, oh, this is actually, you know, one that I'd recommend. You know, when we get to the end of the 80s Twilight Zone and I say, here's the 20 stories across all these seasons that you should see because they're very good science fiction stories, I don't think this season's given me one of those yet. So I'm just hoping the drought kind of, you know, we get something soon. And, you know, we're teetering on good ideas, but we've just not quite hit there yet. So that is my thoughts on episode 3 of season 2 of 80s Twilight Zone. Thank you for joining me. Of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. And you can like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All that stuff is great. Thanks to everyone who does support us already. It really does mean a lot and helps keep everything possible and coming. So yeah, that was me. Thanks for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.